Hey internet, this is Tombox here, welcome to MST.TV, and in this video I'm here to help you guys not get screwed over by the tournament policies. That's right, fine print, we all just love that. Next time you go to a big event, you don't want to get DQ'd after driving for like 5-6 hours just to, well, not play. That really sucks, and I'm here to help you guys not get cheated by your opponent that believe they know the tournament policy or just hiding public knowledge from you. So I'm going to go over some of the most common misconceptions of the tournament policy and how they're misrepresented half the time to skew things in people's favor. And even happens at locals. You're like, oh my god, things happen at locals in regard to this tournament policy? Well, yes it does. And I'm here to, well, tell you all about it. So next time you go to locals, if you see some things are played incorrectly, you'll know. Alright guys, now before I get into this topic, huge shout outs to Patreon. I have a Patreon if you guys didn't know. I don't really like push it on you guys, but you know what, if you guys want to help support this channel and keep it growing strong, you can help support me on Patreon. And latest giveaway winner on Patreon, Blood Cruisnik, you have won that sexy mat. It's shipped to you already, just in case you were wondering. But okay, anyways, let's get into this topic. So let's start with something simple that affects basically everyone that plays at locals, because there's a difference between local tournament and higher tier tournament. There's tier 1, which are locals, tier 2, which is the sanction events like regionals, nationals, YCS, all the big tournaments that require you to write a deck list. So those events are quite different in terms of the end of match procedure. And I'll actually go over what you can and can't do for the local tournament. For the local tournament, when you go into time, the end of match procedure should be as follows. So a lot of you guys believe, how many turns do you take? Well, you guys might say 5, but at locals, it's 3 turns. It is not 5 turns, it's 3 turns at locals, because you have to follow the tier 1 event and single elimination rules for end of match procedure, not the regionals tier 2 event Swiss end of match procedure. So this is section I of the tournament policy. So what happens here is, okay, you get 3 additional turns, and starting at turn 0, so you'll be 0, the other guy will be 1, you'll be 2, and then it'll finish with your opponent, and that'll be 3 additional turns, and that is it. However, if you're both 1 game apiece, well, at regionals, you'll get a draw. At locals, you play 1 more game with 4 turns, starting with your, well, whoever that wins the random die roll. You actually have to roll to see who goes first. It's not who won gets to choose during the end of match procedure at the single elimination. It is a random roll, or like rock, paper, scissors, depending on how you guys, choose to randomize who goes first. But that's the first thing. Now, how is this important? First of all, if you have 2 friends that are basically undefeated up top, and depending on how big your locals is, remember that the prize distribution can change depending on the brackets. And first place will obviously get the most prize, and second place will get the second most amount of prize. And when people say, we'll just split it, it's fine, we'll just split the prize, it's because they're forcing a draw, which makes the record XO1, maximum win to the 0 losses to 1 draw. Then they'll have the highest point regardless of tiebreakers. And that way, they'll be first and second, and skewing the prizes in their favor, and they'll split the prize. So that's technically a form of collusion. And if anyone says that they're first and second at locals and they decide to get a draw, technically, both of them should be DQ'd because it's wrong. But since it is a local tournament, the rules are lightly enforced, so they could get a warning on this stuff and tell them not to do it. And it's up to the tournament organizer to see how they're kind of messing with the tournament to skew prizing in their favor so they can maximize the value. And that's actually a bit unfair for the other players that are the X1 bracket, where they are potentially second place, but they're not getting there due to the fact that there's people are quote-unquote splitting. And that practice should be frowned upon. And remember, some people like to give themselves 5 turns during this time because, their deck could use additional turn to actually break the board. If your opponent chooses to commit everything to stopping you for that 1 turn, that should be it. That's why time in like locals goes so far, is because people play 5 turns and they're like, oh my god, I guess I'll have to get additional games because there's no draw. They mix and match the rules in their favor, and then that's how they kind of screw the rules. The second piece of policy I want to talk about is game state. Now, game state is one of the most common things that are misrepresented, and technically that's actually against the rules to misrepresent it, so let's talk about it. And there's actually multiple parts. I'm only going to cover 3 parts of it. The first line is, players are responsible to accurately represent the game state at all times and truthfully answer questions about any aspect of the game state that is considered to be public knowledge. Okay. So in other words, don't lie to your opponent. I've heard about people lying to their opponents just to gain a little bit of advantage or hiding certain things that are technically public knowledge. You know what? Just answer them truthfully. So here's a quick example. So I say I control a Mechaba and my opponent controls a Masterpiece that is monster immune. So the question would be, if I activate my effect of Mechaba to negate the effect of Masterpiece from activating, would Masterpiece be banished? And then if anyone answers anything but the truth, they would be kind of hiding public knowledge, because the answer would be Masterpiece would stay on the field. Nothing would happen to Masterpiece due to the fact that he was immune to begin with. Anything else, such as, I don't know, you can find out by activating it. Just call a judge on the guy. Just call the judge. Judge will give you the answer. He might not get like a warning or anything, but it's just that the judge will actually clarify the situation and just answer truthfully. And the second thing is cards must be laid out according to the pattern established by the game's map. Okay, so this is actually a very funny one. A lot of people tend to put their deck in the front, and Oscar got called out on this at YCS Madrid many years ago by a judge. Like, hey, put your deck back in the right spot. The judge is actually correct on this one, and if you actually don't comply with his ruling, it can be like escalated to a different offense, such as unsporting conduct, which can technically get you kicked out of the venue. Okay, so if your judge tells you that, hey, put your deck back into the right spot, like, you don't see people at Worlds playing like that. I bet they'll get like DQ'd right away because you're misrepresenting it. They don't want to stream that. So that's exactly how it's going to be. No one ever puts their deck in the incorrect manner. Although people do argue that's more comfortable, but if a judge tells you to put it back in the right spot, then you have to. The only players that are allowed to move it into a different spot, players may not create their own layout unless deemed necessary by the head judge due to disability and etc. So all cards must be in play in deck in their appropriate areas. That's the basics. It's kind of funny, but you know, you can actually request that your opponent put it back in the right spot as well. And you can even tell a judge to enforce it if you're really that uptight about it. And I guess the last thing I kind of want to talk about, players that require tokens or counters, players should have sufficient quantity of tokens and counters to accurately represent each game effect, and they should not use objects, including cards, for a token or counter that could be mistaken for something else in the game. In other words, if you're purposely trying to misrepresent the game, you'll probably get a warning, and then that warning, if you continue to do so, will get escalated to a game loss. I don't want anyone to kind of get screwed over by that. But remember, if you have like a mat that's printed on and it looks like you have a bunch of set cards at all times, I bet the judge will probably ask you to remove that mat. It's like, oh, what if I just have a mat that just looks like a bunch of sleeves, and then make the zones the exact same colors as my sleeve, so it always look like I have a back row, or perhaps it will like skew their vision. Yeah, don't do that. That's just wrong. That's immoral, and you'll probably get requested to remove that mat anyway. So that's a fun thing. Yeah, don't do it. Just don't do it. That's why if someone tries to sell you a mat like that, just don't buy it, because you're not going to be using it at tournaments. Now, next up, hand verification is another piece of policy that a lot of people tend to skew in their favor, because they know that knowing your opponent's hand gives you a huge advantage because you know what they're capable of. And there's a difference between a verification through like cards like Mind Crush, because it does not state look at your opponent's hand, and a card such as Trap Dust Shoot, which states look at your opponent's hand and choose a card. I know the card's banned, but for the example in their document, this is what it states. Now, here's the thing. While resolving an effect that asks for a card in the hand to be verified, so like stuff like Mind Crush, if all legal copies of that specific card is in fact accounted for, you don't get to check their hand. And what people kind of do is that they use Mind Crush to kind of check whether or not your opponent has a certain card. If they called the wrong card and like that card is actually accounted for, because their main goal was to actually check your hand, they actually don't get to check it. Say, for example, there's 2 effect veilers in the graveyard already, and your opponent's like checking whether or not you have an effect veiler. So they go Mind Crush, call effect veiler, and then you go chain effect veiler, ditch a card, and then target one of their monsters. Now that there's 3 effect veilers in the graveyard, Your opponent does not get to look at your hand for one thing, because all 3 Veilers are accounted for, and then now they actually have to ditch a card out of their hand, not knowing what you have. So that's one thing. So that's when they don't have access to it. However, if there's only 2 public knowledge Veilers available at the time, then your opponent gets to quickly verify your hand to make sure there's no 3rd Veiler in the hand. In that case, they actually don't get to read every single card you have. All they get to do is confirm that there is no 3rd copy, and that's it. That's a quick verification, because the card itself does not state look at your opponent's hand. However, under the case of cards that do state look at your opponent's hand, your opponent gets to read every single card in your hand, okay? You don't get to hide certain ones. Like Dust Shoot says, you get to choose a monster and put it back into the deck. Well, all the spells and traps in your hand are also public knowledge at this moment. All right, so they get to look at your hand, and they get to read every single card as long as it doesn't hold up the duel. If you have a photographic memory, well, congratulations, you are going to get an advantage. Even if it's just a photographic memory against Mind Crush, it's still going to work out. So yeah, that's something to be aware of. So don't show your hand unless it's really like a necessity to verify. And if you have to show your hand to your opponent, you have to show every single card. You don't get to hide any cards. That's how it works. So while we're on the topic of public knowledge, what is public knowledge? Well, the following items are considered public knowledge unless a card effect states otherwise, and duelists must answer the following questions involving the topics truthfully. Failure to do so may result in a disqualification penalty. So if you don't answer truthfully, you will possibly get disqualified for misrepresenting the game state. Okay, so number of cards in a duelist's hand, number of cards in their decks, main deck, extra deck, side deck, all of it. This is like the Monarch fiasco where someone put 15 tokens as an extra deck and then it is revealed like, these are just my tokens. You're misrepresenting the game state of the board because tokens do not go there, and therefore you are cheating. And yeah, people have been DQ'd for that. What else is there? The number and names of cards in the duelist's graveyard and the cards that are banished face up. So your opponent doesn't get to check your banished face down, but they themselves can check their own banished face down just so that they don't create an illegal game state. Next up, life points. That's public knowledge. Any notes taken from either player, so such as what life that your opponent has written down versus what life you have written down, and other fun stuff such as mandatory effects. Mandatory effects can have reminders. Optional effects cannot have reminders. However, if you have activated an optional effect that lingers and will resolve later on completely during the end phase, that is an activated effect, and that is for game state maintenance that you do the action. If you did not do the action, both players will actually get penalized for not maintaining game state because it's both players' responsibility, as mentioned before, and keeping track of turns. And this is actually the most fun one that I kind of want to talk about, is printed information on a specific name card. You can name an arbitrary card and your opponent will have to answer you truthfully if they know what it is. Or you can call a judge and the judge can give you the stats for you, but they would be like, why are you calling a judge? You should know this stuff, but in case you don't, you can actually ask for it because printed cards are considered public knowledge. But there's a difference here. Say your opponent uses reinforcements of the army and search for a DD warrior lady, and then they set the card. Even though that was the only card they have in their hand, they set it, and then you decide to ask them the question. What's the defense of that card? Your opponent can say, I don't know, I can't tell you. It's not public knowledge. It's a set card. Set cards are not public knowledge. However, remember, your opponent can trace back your moves and then you kind of do a workaround, so you can always ask them what's the defense of DD Warrior Lady and what's the effect of DD Warrior Lady. According to the example right here, you can always ask, well, hey, what's the defense of Honest? Or what's the printed effect of Soul Exchange? You can always ask for these and your opponent will have to answer you truthfully so that you can kind of figure out the situation for yourself. So your opponent will basically have to answer you truthfully. If they don't answer truthfully, guess what? They're risking the chance of getting DQ'd and wasting everyone's time. So, you know, just play fair. This is what the policy is here for. Don't be too big of a rule shark. Alright, this last piece of policy that I want to cover is regarding bribery collusion. Well, actually, not so much bribery collusion, just don't do bribery or collusion. At LCQ, Last Chance Qualifiers, these are the tournaments that happen right before Nats. There's tons of bribery going on, and then as a shout out to all the judges out there, if you are judging Nats, make sure you catch these people because people are making upwards of $100 from what I've heard. Like, oh, they got to the finals of the LCQ, and then what they do is $100 and I throw the match, but you give me the prizes. And people do that. It's so nasty. It's very apparent. I feel like the judges are kind of turning a blind eye a little towards that, especially when they're like kind of using hint language to do it. What happens is they just don't catch it because there's not enough evidence, but it's so apparent. Okay, so regardless, what else can you do here? As for the other thing is random outcome. Remember, like, oh my god, you guys are super rushed, and like, if you guys both get a draw, perhaps both of you fall into a bubble or fall out of your current bubble. So what happens is, like, you know what, let's roll for it. Don't take that roll. That is actually against tournament policy. Players and tournament officials may not determine the outcome of a match by something random, such as flipping a coin or rolling a die. Don't do it. If someone offers you that, you can just say it as basically it's your free win now, because you just called a judge over and he like offered to a random outcome and a decline, and therefore he just gets a disqualification. Yeah, don't take any sort of randomness to it. If you're gonna get a draw, just play the tournament as is. If you think that the tournament is like there's just not enough time, pay attention to the timer. If just scoop early and scoop early. That's all you have to do to get there the third round. If you're playing the second game and you're just not gonna make it, just scoop early. All right. But if you're winning, just keep winning, of course. Anyways, these are some of the tournament policies that are somewhat or very misrepresented right now, and I just want to share with you guys so that you guys don't get screwed over by the rules just because someone declares himself to be an expert. No one's a full expert on this stuff. I'm only covering the stuff that really affects players most of the time, but if you guys have more policy that you are very unsure of, well, you can leave it down in the comment section below, or you can read the policy yourself on Konami's website, and you know that would save me some time from doing the research for you guys. But until next time, well, if you guys enjoyed this video, please hit me up with a thumbs up. If you guys want to support me on Patreon, go to the Patreon stuff and subscribe to MST.TV. I really appreciate you guys for doing so, and as always, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you like this video, please drop us a like so we know we are doing a good job, and you can also subscribe to MST.TV for more fantastic videos by clicking on the button on the left. Don't forget to check out our partners at Imperium Duelist. They make really high quality mats, including some of my own limited edition release stuff. And if you want to check out one of our past videos, click here on the right. As always, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV, and I'll see you next time.